Today, Nally Elementary would like to recognize all of our March Leaders of the Month. We are so proud of these students for their outstanding leadership in the classroom, playground, lunchroom, and also always displaying the 7 habits here at Nally School. Today, I will recognize each student in each grade level and tell you a little something about them. Okay, starting off in kindergarten, we will start with Mrs. Craig's Leader of the Month, and it is Brooklyn Kelly for being proactive and synergizing. Brooklyn is our small but mighty leader in class. She makes sure she's on top of her work and doing what is expected. Because she is so responsible and proactive, she also looks out for others doing the right thing too. Mrs. Craig said, "I appreciate your hard work and your work quality, Brooklyn. You set the goals very high. Congratulations." In Mrs. Parton's room, we have Evelyn Facemeyer, who begins with the end in mind. Mrs. Parton said, "Evelyn and I have talked about organization and how it helps us when we're learning. I have seen Evelyn stop and look at her things before moving to the next task. Mrs. Parton said, I am so proud of her efforts and mindset to help with her organization skills. Keep it up, Evelyn." In Mrs. Rankin's room, we have Asher Sir Lewis, who begins with the end in mind. Mrs. Rankin said, "Asher comes to school ready to conquer the day. He gets to work and likes to remind others that they should be doing their work too. He aims to please and does not like to be disappointed. Keep being a leader, Asher." In Mrs. Zukowski's room, we have Bryn Ross, who begins with the end in mind. Bryn has been setting goals and meeting them in writing and on her iReady lessons on the computer. She works hard, tries her best, and maintains a positive attitude. Way to go, Bryn. Okay, now our first grade leaders of the month. Our first student is in Mrs. Rector's room, and it is Callie Dingy, who is putting first things first and beginning with the end in mind. Mrs. Rector said, "Callie comes to school prepared and ready to learn each and every day. She puts forth her best effort in all of her work. If Callie doesn't understand, she doesn't hesitate to ask questions, and then with much grit and determination, she will complete the assignment. Way to have a growth mindset, Callie." In Mrs. Fiesler's room, we have Hazel May Huggins, who begins with the end in mind and synergizes. Mrs. Fiesler said, "Hazel May is a role model student who works hard, treats others with kindness, and always includes everyone. She also demonstrates a positive attitude towards learning. We are so lucky to call her our classmate and friend." Way to go, Hazel May. In Mrs. Beard's room, we have Toby Simonson, who is proactive. Toby is such a kind and responsible first grader. He always works so hard in class and makes sure his work is all done before going outside. Keep it up, Toby. And finally, we have in Mrs. Bowser's room, Zoe Grimes, who demonstrates all of the 7 habits. Zoe is proactive and begins with the end in mind. She puts forth her best effort on all of her assignments. She challenges herself by completing extra work at home. For example, she completes extra times tests each night and reminds Mrs. Bowser to send home additional reading books. Way to go, Zoe. Okay, moving on to second grade. Our first student is in Mrs. Grandin's room, and it is Shane Eisman, who is proactive. Mrs. Grandin said Shane has been a proactive rock star this past month. He has really ramped up his efforts in and out of class. He is usually the first to be ready to learn. She said, "I have enjoyed watching him grow in so many ways this year." Way to go, Shane. In Mrs. Slimac's room, we have Kai Cash, who is proactive and synergizes. Kai is a proactive member of our class. She works hard and is responsible. She also synergizes to work with others. Keep up the hard work, Kai. Those third grade teachers will be impressed. In Mrs. Van Dorsten's room, we have Lincoln Moser, who puts first things first. Lincoln has really shown Mrs. Van Dorsten lately how he puts first things first by grabbing his morning work right away and starts working on it. He also works really hard in title and speech. Thank you, Lincoln, for showing others how to be a good leader. And finally, in Mrs. Truax's room, we have Chase Yarrows, who begins with the end in mind. Chase has been working double time both inside and outside of the classroom, and his hard work is showing. He has been planning ahead and creating a great school work play balance that is making Chase very successful. He gets along with others and continues to be more responsible each week. Keep up the great work, Chase. All right, now let's talk about our third grade leaders of the month. First up is Piper Dixon in Mrs. Braley's room, who is proactive, puts first things first, and synergizes. Mrs. Braley said this month the class picked the leader of the month. Some things the students said about Piper was, she is always proactive, She follows directions, she lends a helping hand if she completes her work, and she also synergizes. Way to be a leader, Piper, and set an example to your classmates. In Mrs. Esterly's room, we have Owen Young, who puts first things first. Mrs. Esterly said, recently Owen had the opportunity to go out of town on a Friday. Owen carefully planned out his week so he would not miss any tests by studying hard all week to take them on Thursday. He also worked hard to get his homework and all of his work done early. Great job, Owen. In Mrs. Stassis's room, we have Daphne Foss, who puts first things first and synergizes. Daphne Foss exhibits all the qualities of a student who pays attention, sticks to the plan, and tries to squeeze as much into her day as possible. She puts first things first and finds herself able to do many extras. Way to work hard, Daphne. And in Mr. Straub's room, we have Sienna Petrakovic, who seeks first to understand. Sienna is a good listener. When working with others, she tries to be as fair as possible. She tries to understand a problem or situation before reacting. I am so proud of you, Sienna. All right, and for the leaders of the school, the fourth graders. Up first, in Mrs. Gardner's room and Mrs. Hansel's room, is Isaac Chapman, who puts first things first. Isaac is a leader in room 120. We can count on him to follow directions the first time they are given. He really tries to make good choices and is always responsible with his work. Great job, Isaac. In Mrs. Matson's room, we have Sophia Failer, who is proactive. Sophia is a hard worker that comes to school prepared and ready to learn. Mrs. Matson said, I can count on Sophia to do all of her work and to do it the best of her ability. She cares about her education and it shows through her efforts. She follows rules and is a great leader in fourth grade. Keep it up, Sophia. In Mrs. Oakes' room, we have Miles Paraso, who is proactive. Miles is a quiet leader. He is responsible, he takes initiative, and he does the right thing even when he thinks no one is looking. I am proud of Miles for making good decisions in fourth grade, day after day and week after week. Way to go, Miles. And finally, in Mrs. Toast's room, we have Layla Howd, who thinks win-win. Mrs. Toast said Layla is such a kind young lady. She is always looking out for others around her. Mrs. Toast said, I just found out that one of her classmates didn't have a pencil pouch, and she gave him one so he could get organized. Thank you, Layla, for your caring and thoughtfulness. Congratulations to all of the NALI Leaders of the Month. The entire staff here at NALI is so proud of you. Please keep up the great work and your outstanding leadership. Way to go.